All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachak, Kodash, double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations unto the Akim and her pushing his gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability given to them by Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad, may the election of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shah, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is Brother Quan Wath from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp. Come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shah, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And as you see right here on the natural news, man, it says Israel's bombing in Doha sparks global fury as U.S. allies turn against Netanyahu, right, which is ultimately the leader, over there, in Israel, right, the small hats leader. Um, this right here, man, is breaking news, man, right? Heavy news, right? Prophecies moving super fast, man, right? Yahweh Shemiel Shai is about ready to turn America's allies, right, against them, completely, right? So I'm gonna get into this article a little bit, man. I'll grab a few precepts and we'll close out. I'll start right here. It says the world watching this in stunned disbelief on Tuesday, right, as Israel launched a brazen airstrike on residential buildings in Doha, Qatar, a U.S. ally and host to America's largest Middle East military base. The attack, which Israel claimed targeted Hamas leaders negotiating a ceasefire, killed at least 5 people, including the son of a senior Hamas official and a Qatari security official or officer. Right, it says, but the real casualty may be Israel's already crumbling international standing, right? Because Israel has been basically committing genocide, right, upon the Palestinians, blocking any kind of aid coming in, starving them out, forcing them, into a concentration camp, if you will, you know, and it's not going unseen, right, by the rest of these different Muslim nations. And you even had an Iranian official, Alamini, I can't remember his name, but basically the head of Iran, basically saying, calling for, a gathering of all the different Muslim nations, and that happened, within the last year, and now here you go again, right? You got Israel basically striking, another, a Muslim nation, right? It was, Yemen, right? Then it was Syria, then it was Iran, and now it's Qatar, you know. Again, this is gonna, lead into that, that horrible vision, right? As we read it, in Second Ezra the 15th chapter, beginning at the 28th verse, right? Which is going into World War III, you know. This is heavy news, man, right? It says, but the real casualty may be Israel's already crumbling international standing, as even its closest partners condemn the strike as a reckless violation of sovereignty, right? It says the strike carried out by Israeli jets around 4 p.m. local time sent shockwaves through the region. Qatar's foreign ministry called it a cowardly Israeli strike or attack. It says, and a blatant violation of international laws. The Gulf nation, which has played a key role in mediating Gaza ceasefire talks, vowed to pursue all diplomatic and legal means. Right, so meaning they're going to go after the small hats, right, legally, going into the UN and whatnot. It says Majid Al Ansari, Qatar's foreign ministry spokesman, told reporters that Israel had sent a dangerous message. Mediators will be scapegoated, will not be safe, and there will be no respect for sanctity of their job. So again, they're saying, hey, we're going to strike on whoever we want to strike on. And if you're helping those, right, who are against us, right, you're going to ultimately be, struck as well, right? This is basically a threat, to the nation of Qatar, right? By, the small hats, right? It says a wave of global condemnation. We're not going to read all this article. It's, kind of long, but I just want to read these, next few paragraphs, right? Again, to ultimately get some context of what is taking place and how, what had taken place and how it's ultimately affecting, how it's going to affect America, and how, this is ultimately, going to lead into, World War III, right? It says a wave of global condemnation, right? It says the backlash was swift and near universal. Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, both U.S. allies, warned of grave consequences. So again, now we're seeing all these different, Muslim nations like banding together and saying, "Hey, what the fuck?" You know, that was some jacked up shit, right? It says, from Israel's criminal transgressions, Turkey's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and called the attack a blatant violation of international law. Now, these nations as well, right, have deals, right? Saudi Arabia, Arab Emirates, even Turkey, right, have, deals and partnership with Russia as well, man. You know, Turkey is listed in Ezekiel the 38th chapter. Matter of fact, let's grab that real quick. In Ezekiel the 38th chapter, it says, right, this is Ezekiel 38 in verse 4. It says, "And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws," and which is ultimately meaning what? The Lord's going to turn him back into that Soviet era, right, hand over the button, hovering, sweating, right, ready to push that button type mentality when it comes to going to war, right, with America, right? It says, "And I will bring thee forth in all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company, with bucklers and shields, and all of them handling swords," right? It says Persia, right, which we know the Persians are, today the Iranians, right, which America and Iran, right, had a small, couple week skirmish, right, between the two, again, over Israel, right, over Israel and what, Israel is doing, but it says right here, Persia, which is the Iranians, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, right? It says Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters and all his bands, right? Just going over there into that, that area of Turkey today, right? It says, and many people with thee. Be thou prepared and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. So these nations that, that are allied with, that are allied with Russia, if, America ultimately or Israel ultimately continues, right, to press the issue, right, Russia's eventually going to step in. And right now we see America coming up against Venezuela, which is a direct ally, right, to Iran and Russia. So it's like this, a prophecy is unfolding right before our face, man. But I'll read the second paragraph, actually halfway through at the very top where you see it says, Turkey's president Recep Tayyip Erdogan and called for the attack a blatant violation of international law, while Jordan's foreign ministry declared it cannot be justified under any circumstances. Now here we go. All right, it says even European nations that are traditionally more cautious in criticizing Israel spoke out. Is Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni opposed any form of escalation. Switzerland's foreign ministry deemed it unacceptable, and Belgium's top diplomat insists there was no military solution to the Gaza conflict. So it's like these nations again are part of the EU, right? The European Union, right? Which they're saying, hey, we're not with that. We're not with this whole situation. And as we read down, right? I'll just jump down. I want to jump up and finish this, but when you read down, it says the U.S. caught in the crossfire. The attack put the Trump administration in an awkward position, while the White House distanced itself from the operation, with President Trump calling it not a decision made by me. It stopped short of condemning Israel, so it didn't come up against their actions, right? It says eliminating Hamas is a worthy goal, so they're ultimately condoning, right, the Israel firing on Qatar, right, and you not even caring about its the nation's sovereignty, and its ability to govern its own affairs. It says Trump's press secretary said even as the president admitted the strike does not advance Israel or America's goals, reports later revealed that Israel had only notified the U.S. minutes before launching the missiles, leaving American officials scrambling to assess the fallout. So they're moving, right, without America's, say so. which we understand that Israel basically runs, America, right? So they really do whatever they want. America ultimately backs them up. But see, America is not even condemning their assault, if you will, on Qatar, which means that they're for the decision, which again, right, the American, allies are going to see that and be like, hey, well, why are you not doing anything against it? Jumping back up to the last paragraph, it says United Nations didn't mince words either. Secretary General Antonio Guterres labeled the strike a flagrant violation of Qatar's sovereignty, while Pope Leo described the situation as very serious. Meanwhile, social media erupted with outrage, with many pointing out the hypocrisy of Israel attacking a country that hosts 10,000 U.S. troops, right? So they didn't even care. They didn't warn nobody, or they didn't, warn anybody, and give them time, right, to respond, or, to accept or deny, right? They ultimately just moved, man. And this is right here. Again, these movements made by Israel, right, are going to draw this whole thing out into World War III, which again is prophesied that it would happen, because as it says in Jeremiah chapter 50 and verse 45, it says, therefore hear ye the counsel of Yahweh, Ba'Hashem Yahushua, that he had taken against Babylon, right? Because the ultimate goal, right, the ultimate place of destruction is going to be where? It's going to be America, right? Babylon the Great, right? It says, in his purposes that he hath purpose against the land of the Chaldeans. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out, which the least of the flock is going back to the small hats, right? They're the least of the flock, and they're drawing out who? Drawing out the rest of these nations, right? To come up against them as well as America, man. And again, America being, the main, culprit, right? Because America is ultimately allowing for all of this to, to happen and backing them financially, right? With weaponry and different aid bills being, passed, sending them, money and whatnot. America is completely backing this whole thing, which again is leading, right, is going to lead, right, to the uprising of, these, Russia, China, right, these different powerful, nations within the world, right, and their allies, and as we're seeing, right, even America's allies, which is Revelations 17 and verse 16, right, it says, in the 10 horns, which is going back to these EU nations, right, we're seeing it, right, these EU nations are saying, hey, we're condemning, right, this assault on Qatar, right, by the small hats, in which America is not denying, Said in the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, right? Hate America, right? And shall make herself desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Meaning they're going to be shooting those missiles, man. They're going to be joined with Russia's allies, against America and America's allies. Against America, and the small hats, right? The Israelis, right? America's allies are finna turn against them, man. Because of the wickedness, because of the evil, right? That they continue to push in the earth and continue to condone from the small hats, man. We're looking at the fulfillment of that horrible vision that we, read about in 2nd Esdras, the 15th chapter, the 28th verse. It's coming, man. It's coming close, which Lord will, I'll go into that, that the breakdown of that, that horrible vision, but I'm going to go ahead and close out by, bringing out this in Revelations 11 and verse 14. It says, the second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. So it's coming, man. Right? It's around the corner, right? America is finna be out of there, right? Israel finna be out of there too, man. The difference between the two is Israel's gonna be built back up, but America's not. Hey, World War III, man, is around the corner with, the small hats, right? Constantly, being a bully, America, right? Siding with, the small hats, We're seeing prophecy unfold, and America is, finna get its recompense, right? Utter and complete destruction, right, as we read in the scriptures. But that's all I got, man. I just want to make that real quick, straight to the point, just touch on that. Lord will, get another lesson in, man, through the Spirit, Lord will. But till next time, I will say Yahba Shemel Shai, Bashim Kakadash Barakatah. All praise Yahba Shemel Shai. Till next time, I say Shalom.